All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 157. It's Tuesday night. This is when we'd love to hear from you. Been a good one. It's been a heck of a week. A lot of stuff going on. I mean, we had obviously Saturday's games, and then we had what happened with Mel Tucker. So it's been a particularly busy weekend and week. So, again, if you'd like to join the conversation, you can just hit request from the Twitter app and be happy to let you up and hear what your thoughts are in this college football week. So again, my name's Bobek Hayeri. I'm your host. We do these every Tuesday night to talk about college football. Let's see. Lots of things going on. We can talk about what's going on with Mel Tucker. We can talk about what's going on with the Pac-12 temporary restraining order filed by the remaining two teams to keep what they are fearing the other teams are going to do to them. And then one last note just before we start, I always like to take a second and recognize the passing of a young man who was playing for Sacramento City College. Justin McAllister, a player for them, apparently passed away during conditioning drills today. That was being reported out of Sacramento Bee and other sources there. So just wanted to say a moment to give our thoughts to all of those, his teammates, his coaches, and his family, of course. So all of that said, Andrew or John, whichever you want to unmute, we'll go ahead and hear what your thoughts are.
So I guess my question just regarding the last 2 weekends now, we've seen two frankly, two programs that have really dominated the last decade. Bama and Clemson taking, I would say, pretty unusual losses for them. Even considering the last couple of years, I think it's kind of unusual to watch both those teams lose so early this season. Do you think there's anything going on? Is there maybe a single factor you think really that complies for two teams like that? With the more loosening of the transfer rules, with the transfer portal or NIL rules, that you think are maybe that more teams like Bama or Clemson are not keeping up with?
That's a really good question, and there's been a lot of kind of discourse on that. Certainly, the criticism that Dabo's had at Clemson a lot, and it's one that he's addressed, and I believe he addressed again actually this week, was that he's been very slow to adapt to many of these rules, especially he's not a fan of the transfer portal. He's very hesitant to use it. I believe he actually had a quote this week that was, "I would have been long gone if I ran this program the way everybody else wanted me to." At the end of the day, you have to have conviction in what you believe and understand that some people are going to like you and some people are not. And that was Dabo's quote. Because again, a lot of folks want him to adapt quickly to some of the things that are coming up, and he's been quite resistant and quite vociferous about it. Meanwhile, if you look at Coach Saban, he will grumble a little bit, but he will adapt. The moment he sees value in any new thing, he tends to lean into it fairly hard, and mostly because, as we've talked about and as books have been written, his main focus has always been recruiting the very, very best. And when by recruiting the very, very best, he knows he can do so much more. And that's something that was striking. I still remember there was a book written last year that came out I want to say last fall. And one of the anecdotes of coaches who knew him when he was an assistant said the only time they ever saw him like get emotional and even tear up is when he had lost the recruiting battle. And that was how important it was to Coach Saban. So he's been willing to adapt. He always kind of does that look. If you guys want to change the rules, I'm not trying to impersonate how he talks. If you're trying to change the rules, I'll adapt, and you'll all have to deal with Alabama with this new weapon in its arsenal. So they both have, I think, different approaches there in that while Saban tends to hesitate, he tends to adapt, and Dabo seems a bit more on the resistance side, which has created some tension. You brought up an interesting question of is talent catching up everywhere? One of the more interesting points I actually was reading in an article this week, and it's one that's been discussed, is the transfer portal has allowed the SEC to be kind of, I wouldn't say robbed, but I mean, if you're in Alabama and you bring so many blue chip players in, you're inherently going to have guys who aren't happy because you can maybe play 30 of them pretty well, and then you're going to have a bunch of folks who knew how good they were suddenly become disgruntled, and that may give opportunities to teams that may not have been able to win the high school recruiting battle to go into the portal and pull some of these guys through. And they can play in other places. So that was one theory that, the reason that we're seeing, for example, the SEC did not have a good week. The Mississippi schools were the highlight of the conference seemingly this week. And a lot of these other programs that were taking them down, the other programs were heavily reliant on transfer players, or at least had some key positions that were coming out of the portal. So perhaps that's part of, it's, if you look at it historically, the whole reason they had scholarship limits was because there was historically some teams were just loading up completely on some talented players, and there weren't any for anyone. Like, you could have a roster of like 100 players and never really have to play any of them, but you're keeping them away from your opponent. So that's part of the reason why scholarship limits were put in there, especially at the FBS level to where they are now. And what we're seeing is an opportunity. And to some extent, you always wonder about that. Like, here's a fun historical one. Like, let's say Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. He's always said, I was recruited to Miami, and then you have an all historic defensive end come. I can't remember. He was a D lineman of some kind, but somebody gets ahead of him. And then, so of course, his college football career didn't really work out. So he found clearly a much more lucrative career in not pro wrestling necessarily, but acting afterwards. But imagine if the transfer portal was back then. Then would he have just transferred to like another school from Miami because everyone knew he was good enough for Miami, and Miami in those days was excellent? Would that have actually led to someone like The Rock actually ending up playing a successful college football career at another program? It's kind of fun to imagine that. But yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think, frankly, there's a lot of factors going into that. I think of Alabama, everyone was kind of almost waiting for this year. It's weird to say, like, is it a down year? Is it a blip for them? With Clemson, it's a little more, people are frustrated because over the years, Dabo's been getting a lot of criticism and pushing back, just like that quote, that I'll do it my way. And I mean, there's nothing wrong about a head coach, doing what they want to do, but it's, I remember one of the top discussion points that was brought up by a member of our CFB, North Carolina fan, Reservoir Dogs. He's like, using the transfer portal as a hill you're going to die on just seems odd. But that's what some of the thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't do himself really any favors to being, well liked outside the Clemson community. So, I mean, I just don't think that mentality works. I think it's you really. I mean, maybe at a top flight program where you get the best players every year, but I mean, any other level of this division of football, it doesn't really work unless you really go for the portal now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to credit Ski Mask Smurfy, one of the listeners. He added a comment in the box, basically like, yeah, Bear Bryant was the reason we have scholarship limits, because he was the one doing that. That kind of having those games with just loading up an enormous roster and not necessarily playing everyone, but playing keep away with some of that star talent. I see, Andrew, you've been able to make it up. Would love to hear from you. What's on your mind?
Hey, can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So I feel like I know quite a bit about the situation with the Pac-2, with two-pack, as it were. But man, this divorce is going to get nasty, isn't it? Because I mean, you're looking at it's not just as simple as Wazoo and Oregon State, taking on all the assets that are left over. If it were, I think that it would be, I don't know, easier to sort out. But what assets does the Pac-12 really have? Aren't they being sued for like $60 million by Comcast? They're being sued by the Holiday Bowl. There's all sorts of stuff like that. And are they that desperate to take on that those debts? Are they going to be paying those? Or is that going to be distributed throughout the other 10 that have departed? I mean, the whole thing is just so messy. And
yeah, I think you've absolutely nailed it. It is a complete disaster and a mess, because obviously the news that kind of was entertaining some this week, because a lot of folks were following this on Twitter, is that Washington State and Oregon State actually took the Pac-12 to court to get a temporary restraining order, because their belief was, and this is where it gets interesting, the Kliavkoff, the commissioner, was going to have a board meeting this week on Wednesday. It was supposed to be tomorrow. And so the Wazoo and and Oregon State in county court, I believe it's Whitman County, which is, I believe, a county either Wazoo is in or proximate to it, decided to have ask for a temporary restraining order, arguing that they were afraid, because basically the conference had rules to prevent teams that were departing from doing things that were adverse to the remaining teams. This was actually instituted the previous year after USC and UCLA said they were leaving. So the Pac-12 said, like, no, you guys cannot vote on certain subjects anymore. You're no longer, there's a conflict of interest. You don't have the interest of the conference at heart. Okay, that's a reasonable take. And I'm pretty sure USC and UCLA didn't really care because they were going to the Big Ten. So now with 10 of the teams leaving and only Wazoo and Oregon State left, they're under a genuine concern that now when the rest of the group gets together to vote on things, they're going to be voting for things that benefit the 10 that are leaving and, basically hosing the 2 that are left. So that was the gist of the fear. Now, when you file for things in the legal action, you ask for, you sometimes shoot for the moon, you ask for a lot of things, and who knows what a judge or a jury will buy. So they were asking for a lot of control. They wanted to make it so that a lot of decisions could simply not be made. However, the judge, because both sides had to argue in court, the Pac-12 was able to at least get the judge to allow the conference to take actions on day-to-day business needs. Because one of the concerns was if the asks that Wazoo and Oregon State were putting in might accidentally, or intentionally cause a delay in figuring out simple compensation things for employees of the conference. And it was a concern that would just hasten the demise because suddenly a bunch of employees are going to realize there's no guarantee I'm going to be paid again. And they would all start to bail, and then the conference would implode faster than anyone expected. So that was part of what was being litigated in that motion, that call for a motion. So ultimately, the judge was convinced that the Pac-12 cannot have a board meeting without court approval. So now a judge has to say, okay, you can have that meeting. And I assume, I haven't read the details of it. There may be some requirements that the judge has to see the plans, the schedule, and things like that to prevent some kind of tomfoolery. But to be honest, another part of the problem is this is all speculative. There's been nothing said that the teams were going to get together at a board meeting and do something that was going to harm Wazoo and Oregon State. But I don't also entirely blame them for their concern because, as you pointed out, there's active litigation going against the conference. There's a question of, because I mean, frankly, the idea of whether the conference is even kept together is there going to be enough money to make it worth that? If you're going to be potentially dealing with legal liabilities, and no company or organization likes to have open litigation on the books. It's a mess because you don't know exactly how much you're going to pay out, or if you're going to pay out at all. It's going to be an interesting question for whether or not they expand and whether the Pac-12 simply loads up from some of the G5 and becomes kind of a new version. I love it. Maybe they should call it Tupac and Friends, or the New Adventures of Tupac. Cougar and the Beeve or something like that. I don't know. It just seems to have fun with that, but all I know is at the very least, those 2 schools are doing well on the field. So no matter what goes on off the field, and gosh, there's so much going on off the field, the fans at least have something to cheer them up in a really, really kind of anxious time for both those schools. But it's a good question. And you're right. There's so many moving parts on the value of the conference and the potential liabilities for the conference. And I don't necessarily blame the lawsuits that are coming, because if you made a cable deal with the Pac-12 network and it's about to implode, or you made a deal with the conference and the conference is now completely lost its value next year, at least significantly different value than what you were bidding on, that is something that makes a lot of sense, at least from a legal standpoint, if you're one of the aggrieved parties. But yeah, it's a great question.
In your eyes, though, I mean, because they're talking reverse merger with the Mountain West, and assuming that happens in some form or fashion, you add the Mountain West as is and form, Broke Pack Mountain or whatever. You got those guys together, you go back to the table with whoever and try to regardless of what kind of money they can get with some sort of media deal, I'm sure someone could pick them up. But do you think there's any shot that they're considered like a power conference with that get up, even with these 2 teams performing as well as they are, and even with Boise in there?
No, realistically, I have trouble seeing that, because they would need to establish a much bigger footprint in terms of, because I mean, yeah, you'll have a couple of really strong teams. There's some solid teams in the Mountain West, no doubt. I mean, Boise State, even though arguably they're really going through a downtime, there's still some potential there with, Fresno State. Well, they had kind of they're still undefeated, but that last week was a little bit scarier than expected against an FCS program. But I'm not sure, San Diego State's going to be there. You're going to have some decent enough teams. San Diego State was clearly attractive enough for the Pac-12 to flirt with them until the conference exploded because Kliavkov had no idea how to manage things. I still can't believe they almost had San Diego State and SMU, and instead the whole thing implodes because there's going to be so much written about it. I mean, we've only begun to read about how mismanaged that closure was, but no, I don't think realistically if there is a reverse merger, because I mean that's a problem. I mean, and historically, Wazoo and Oregon State have solid years, and there have been years where they've been excellent. I still remember the early 2000s Washington State going to the Rose Bowl, being basically a little terror all the time, challenging USC, which was at the time not doing very well, to be the top of the conference, and really competing with UCLA and the slow beginning of a new Oregon program that is now obviously a stronger program than it was in those days. I think neither of them bring enough to pull those who join them all that much higher. I mean, you could argue that the as a whole their ships will rise, but rising to the level of being a P5, I don't think that's going to be realistic. At least the other conferences aren't going to be happy with that, because to some extent you have to have the other conferences see you as a peer. And with the discussions that we've heard that are going to be happening with the revise, I mean, they're going to look to revise the playoff. The 12-team playoff is certainly coming next year and the year after that. But again, it looks like we're going to probably see a shift from the the six top champions, which was implied to be the P5 plus the highest ranked G5 conference champion, to probably a 4 plus, the top 4 plus 1. And then in the Pac-12 is going to be, in that group, as well as then just some one more at-large team. That seems to be where we're going there. And the reason I mention that is that kind of gives you an idea of the opinion that the other P4, or however you want to cut them or name them at this point, are viewing the state of the Pac-12 next season under any circumstances. Because again, I think it's hard to say the addition of the entirety of the Mountain West, or picking and choosing from the Mountain West and the American, could build something that could be at that level. I'm not sure that's possible, and I'm not sure they have it would ever be considered that. All right, that was an interesting one.
Thanks for
Again, I just also want to say, if you'd like to join the conversation, by all means hit request. We'd love to talk to you. I know I saw you unmuted, Andrew. Did you want to add something to that?
No, I just wanted to say thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's see. I mean, again, there's so much going on in college football. The one story that obviously kind of took everyone by surprise, including, from what it sounds like, the people at the university themselves, the administration, was the whole fiasco with Mel Tucker at Michigan State. The story came out, depending on what time zone you're in, early in the morning or late at night. And Mel Tucker apparently, and the crazy thing is, he's admitted so much of it in the story, that he, with Brenda Tracy, the advocate for victims of sexual assault, he did some just abhorrent behavior over the phone. And what the interesting thing about it is, the timeline that we were kind of shared, is that I'm sorry, I'm just pulling up one of the comments I read about. Yeah, there we go. So they had that presser, and I did listen into it with both Michigan State AD and the president, the interim president, because again, they've had their own scandal in recent years. And the presser was handled not that well, because a lot of reasons, and I'll just quickly dissect that. Howler, the AD, made it very clear that they received allegations against Mel Tucker in late December of last year. They then, and again, from the press conference, they then immediately started their system, which they have for dealing with accusations of the allegations like that. They hired an independent investigator who started their own process. And by July 25th, the recommendation was issued by the independent investigator. And from there, they agreed that there should be a hearing. And so therefore, they, through their process, arranged for a whole formal hearing that was going to be scheduled for October 5th. It's still scheduled for October 5th. And that's how they described it. The went through the motions of saying Michigan State is focused on conducting a fair, thorough, and unbiased investigation and allowing the processes that they've set up to play out. And that's a safe answer. That's what you would kind of expect. But then what was interesting was during that press conference, that was when they confirmed that they decided to take an additional interim measure to suspend Mel Tucker without pay, quote, due to new developments before the hearing and with the best interests of everyone, including student athletes and the university community. That made them sound like, hey, the public just found out about this, so now we have to take more action. And here's where it gets kind of confusing to me, because later that day, not during the press conference, they didn't take any questions. Apparently, and I will say I lend some credence to this. Apparently, the athletic director and the president had no idea about the details of the accusation because of the process within that university. The accusation went to a certain office. I forgot the exact name for it, but the one for dealing with matters like this, and especially complaints against employees of the university. And after what they had dealt with the whole Larry Nasser fiasco, they've created this whole system where it will keep influence coming from the administration out of the investigative process. So I do see where this is coming from, but as a consequence, all they were being told is, hey, there's been an accusation against Coach Tucker. The process has begun, and they were never exactly told the details. So they apparently only found the details when USA Today published their own bombshell on late Saturday night. And part of what happened there was, apparently, as the news is becoming out, Brenda Tracy says through her attorney that she didn't intend to let people know, that go public with her side of this, at least at this point, and that some local sources had been able to provide her name and that she was involved in such an investigation. And from there, they decided, well, we should get on top of it and tell the story on our side. And they reached out to USA Today and shared apparently 100 pages of documents on the subject. And from there, we got the article that was the bombshell that led to Mel Tucker's suspension. And we'll see where it goes. I frankly would not be surprised if we don't hear a whole lot new, at least substantive, about his status at the university until that hearing is done on October 5th. There's a lot of reasons for it. Certainly, the university wants to demonstrate that they can run their process that they've set up for dealing with such accusations. And if you're more cynical, you would also say that would, if they go through October 5th and it's recommended he's terminated, that might, free up that contract, and that infamous contract, the $90 million contract that seemed to be almost impossible to get out of without paying him an enormous amount of money. Suddenly you have a potential for a for-cause termination. But that seems secondary, and I'll give them credit that I think the university is treating that as a secondary factor, because they really want to make sure they do this right, given all of the terrible press that they earned with what had happened in the prior situation that happened at the university. So just figured I'd mention that because, it's been such a bombshell story. I wanted to bring it up. But I see we've got several people who want to come up, and I know John's hand is raised. I will let you, John, talk. Then I'm going to go to, let's see. I let people up right before you talk, only so that there isn't a technical error where sometimes it doesn't let me hear you talk. That's the reason why I wait until the last second to let folks up. But I promise to let up Nate, Ski Mask Smurfy, and then Scott Thompson. I'll go to you guys in that order. But John, what's going on?
Hey, well, just a quick question about Caleb Williams. I know you saw the news. It was, essentially saying that depending on how the Cardinals perform this year, or depending on what team is on the first overall pick, he might go back to USC. What's the realistic expectation of that actually occurring? Because I really don't think I think that the chances are minimum, but I think it's a funny note to put out there.
It's a funny note to put out there, but man, I would hope he gets out there and gets paid. I say this as a USC alumnus who is, I admit, happy to see him playing for us. That game against Stanford was completely unhinged. I did not expect to see USC blow out Stanford at that level, even though Stanford has got a new head coach. Historically, Stanford, even in a bad year, would somehow have USC's number. My favorite summary of the game between USC and Stanford, by the way, because USC got ahead by an enormous amount before kind of just coasting the rest of it, was that let me see if I can find it here. The second half should have been an email, because the second half was boring. It was, 7-7, no scoring in the third quarter. The game was already settled by the time they got there because it was 49-3 at halftime. And that three came late. So, yeah, again, Caleb Williams, I don't know if he should stay in college at that point. He's proven enough. But of course, NIL makes it attractive. And gosh, if he stayed for another year, I'm sure he'd get even more insane contracts because he's one of the few college football players that even non-college football fans are starting to become aware of. And that, I'm not saying it because he's a USC fan. I mean, certainly there have been players who've reached that. I mean, Johnny Manziel was arguably a player like that. He started to go beyond just being a star player in the college level. But no, I think if it would be really curious because it's still an extremely violent sport, and at any given moment, your entire career could go down the tubes. So I hope he would consider going to the NFL next season. But again, it's an interesting one, and I wonder how much of it is just some boisterousness and some bravado by his father, and his father isn't the one who's putting his body on the line. So that's my thought on that. Hey, Nate, you've been really patient. What's going on?
Bob, what's up, man? Appreciate you letting me up here and talking again. Put your space on my checklist to come into tonight. So good stuff as always. Glad to be a part of it. Yeah, man, I could talk about college football, until the next morning. So we could go down whatever you want. But I could recap Georgia real quick if you want. Yeah, it's kind of weird, being on a.
I'd love
Yeah,
that.
it kind of weird a little bit being on a Tuesday. Like I'm already kind of thinking South Carolina, but I get it. Monday for me would be even better, but it's your setup, so whatever. But yeah, I'll say this about Georgia. I thought they looked good. It was another slow start. Number one team in the country. I still think they hold that ranking. Carson Beck really got into a groove after, again, kind of a slow start, but I'll run through his numbers real quick. He's still 171 rating, 283 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Had the weird interception, but if you watch it, it wasn't even like a real interception. It was a bounce off somebody, and then another player gets it. Roderick Robinson, who is the freshman running back from out in California, had another great game. I think he's going to be a key player, even as surprising as it is as a freshman. I think he's doing a great job filling in with Deshaun Edwards, which Kirby Smart said in his presser, if we needed Deshaun, then we would have played him. So that to me says a lot about maybe what we'll see versus South Carolina. I think he might come into this game, even though we're still picked like 27 points to win at home versus South Carolina. We might see our first Deshaun Edwards running back game. Kendall Milton still kind of the focus, even though Robinson, led overall with the average. I think Kendall's still our ground and pound guy. And then Dylan Bell was kind of a topic of conversation here in Dog Nation, where he's a receiver but was playing some running back reps. And there's a lot of discussion of whether he's going to continue to do that or not. It was asked to Kirby, and Kirby kind of made light of it. He's like, hey, he's a receiver. We're going to put him where we want. And you guys may think he looks like a running back, or they had this like back and forth. But I think the Dylan Bell thing could be interesting, especially as we go forward with what Bobo wants to do with the system and, the injuries we have at running back. Oscar Delp had a great game. Tight end, he's a backup to Brock Bowers. I think Brock Bowers is kind of put on the shelf because we all know how great he is. I think that they're just kind of waiting until we get into SEC play before they showcase what they want to do with Brock. That's my opinion, but that's kind of what it looks like. I just don't think that they felt like they needed to keep running him with the ball, risk injury. I think that they were getting Delp some more carries, or just not letting Brock be like this focus that he's going to be as we go down the SEC play. Defense looked amazing again. Malachi Starks. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, now that you're on defense, I'm really curious to see how the Georgia defense handles Spencer Rattler, because he had a great week last week, but now he's facing the Georgia defense. And this is also going to be a great opportunity for the Georgia defense to show themselves against the talent. Maybe the entire South Carolina team's got obviously they have got issues. And they're not necessarily going to be a challenger for the whole thing this year, but this is at least going to be a really interesting benchmark, I think, to see how Georgia is looking this season against SEC competition.
Yeah, totally agree with that. South Carolina, they're going to come in, they're going to be fired up, regardless of how they played, the first 2 weeks. They're going to want to have a little vengeance against Georgia because we destroyed them in Columbia last year. They're going to want to come back in and kind of rain on our parade. So I expect Caleb Williams, or not Caleb Williams, I expect Cesar Rattler to come in and play hard, try to give it his most, and you're going to see him do some running for sure to try to get first downs and whatnot because the defense of Georgia is still there. They're stout. I mean, we have guys that go in and out on nickel and dime. Malachi Starks is arguably one of the best, if not the best DB in the country. Jalen Walker hasn't even gotten started yet, and you're going to see more of him. I just think that there's a lot of pieces of the Georgia defense that hasn't even been really played out because of the 2 games we played. You'll see more and more talent and more schemes that are going to be ran, blitz packages and whatnot that we haven't done against UT Martin and Ball State. So that's going to happen. And I think South Carolina will definitely give it their best, effort. I think it's still probably like a 42-13 type game. Georgia wins. I think that they cover. But yeah, that's my assessment. And then not to just harp all day on Georgia, bouncing back to, and, whatever you want to talk about, obviously it's your space, but what do you think legitimately is like the top 4 right now? I mean, Florida State looks really good. I think Michigan is still easily right there in the mix. Texas after the Alabama win. I mean, that game was awesome to watch. I was so excited to watch it. I don't think Auburn looked that great, even though it was a late game and all that nonsense out west. But what are your takes? I'm not trying to jump ahead, but I'm curious about your top 4.
No, I think that's a great question.
Cool.
I mean, because I think you're absolutely right. Auburn, by the way, I still couldn't believe that Cal game. I mean, we've reached a point where I can't tell if Cal is good or if Auburn's just first, give Hugh Freeze some time to get his program together, or that game was probably the most surprising to me because I did not expect it, especially before the season, to be as close as it was. Although when Cal took care of North Texas better than anyone imagined, I think on the road, suddenly Cal looked like it had more life than people had given it credit. So maybe that is Justin Wilcox finally getting them together. But I'll set that aside. The top 4 nationally, I mean, Georgia still has to be number 1 in my mind because, granted, I think people have not, I don't want to say slept on them because that's a stupid thing to say. No one's sleeping on Georgia, but they've just been kind of in the background because of the opponents. While Alabama, Texas clearly was a stronger team and, unquestionable. Now the question is, are they going to be part of that top 4? At this point this week, I'm kind of leaning towards, I do get why they were put in that top 4. I agree with Florida State. They look really strong. Michigan, again, they're almost in the Georgia situation where we haven't quite seen them play someone where you're like, oh yeah, this is exactly who Michigan is. I think the problem with ranking right now is because Florida State and Texas seem to have at least had games where they could be benchmarked against a stronger team. USC hasn't done that yet. And that's another problem. So it's kind of going to be an interesting question to see. I think I don't have a problem picking between those 5 teams at this point. And even then, I hesitate. Ohio State, Penn State, there's some strong teams there to pick from. At this point, I feel more confident saying that Georgia, Florida State, and Texas are teams that I'm strong on right now. I'm having trouble picking the 4th at this point. Yeah,
Totally agree with that. And USC is I would say probably the team that I look at most importantly with the schedule and what they have in front of them. I think that is probably the 4th. There's cases to be made for some other teams. Is Penn State legit? Is Utah legit? I don't think we really know. I mean, with their schedule, they could become legit because their schedule to me just is not gonna be detrimental to them. I mean, Tennessee, are they? I mean, Austin Peay was giving them some problems. Are they really good? Are they not? Trying to think just down the road. Ohio State's going to be in the mix. We know that. I mean, there's too much talent there. I get it. Michigan and Ohio State, it's usually that game what kind of delivers the product of that division, but it'll still be interesting to see how that plays out. And then, gosh, I had another team, drawing a blank. Florida State. Oh, is Colorado. Are they legit? Are they not? Everyone's kind of just ESPN's so hype about it. Everyone's hype watching them, but until they play a real team, and we're going to see them play a real team when they play Oregon, and Oregon is, still a team that's in the mix, right? I remember the team. I want to see how good Colorado is. I think everybody wants to. They got athletes, man. They can run the ball. They can move the ball. They're fun to watch. Travis Hunter's a stud. So, I think we're all going to watch and see what happens. And then the only other questionable team that I see in the top 10, which I'm not really sold on, I think you could insert a lot of other teams, is Washington really a top 10 team? That one to me is, unless I'm missing something, and I very well could be, I don't see how Washington is a top 10 team. If you have more insight on that, I would love to hear.
No, I agree. Yeah. It's kind of, they're in that zone where it's kind of hard to pin them just yet. But luckily, some of these Pac-12 teams are going to square off against each other. Going back to your Colorado thing, once they assumably will take care of business against Colorado State in the rivalry game, knowing that is a rivalry game, if they can win out September, no one's going to have a doubt. Because not only will they have beat Oregon on the road, because Autzen, I've been there for an away game. It is absolutely a bonkers environment. It's not as big as the other stadiums, but it is so well designed to make that just a complete stress trap for whatever team is on that field. They'll then wrap up with a home game against USC on September 30th. If they can win those 3 games, I think then people are going to be like, okay, they are for real. And who's going to open that checkbook to give Dion literally whatever he wants to try and lure him away? But those are some big ifs. Those are some really big ifs. But I'm just happy we managed to get a guy credentialed to cover that USC Colorado game, regardless if both teams going undefeated, and I hope they do. That's going to be a hell of an experience on that sideline. So I'm really jealous of our photog who's going to be there for that. I want to let up a couple of other folks since I've been really patient. Let's go with Ski Mask Smurfy first, and then and feel free to stay up, Nate. I love hearing from you. It's been great. And then you can chime in whenever you like. Yeah. Definitely. So Ski Mask Smurfy, what's going on?
Had to unmute myself. Everything's going pretty well. I just wanted to, I don't know if you talked about the whole Charter Disney battle, and probably
I have not. What are your thoughts on it?
I think Disney sort of did a good job in sort of leveraging that. Hey, we have Monday Night Football and basically all of Power 5 college football. Perfect time to sort of leverage, trying to work out a better deal for yourself. But I think also in the fall of it, we're sort of like seeing how even the cable companies are sort of viewing the sort of content that they have on TV and how that might eventually affect the contracts that are paid out for sports, particularly college football, especially with Disney sort of has a lot of weight in terms of college football now that SEC is going to be exclusively with them now and no longer on CBS. So I think this might be the deal that sort of like is the canary in the coal mine for how deals might get worked out later between cable companies, cable companies, content providers, which eventually will trickle down into the colleges. I want to know what your thoughts might be on that.
That's a great question. And what we're seeing is what has been, I've seen it, in business reports, not in college football reports, what we're just starting to see with this kind of dispute between the Disney family of networks and cable provider, and then probably future cable providers, is the legacy of that entire business model slowly unraveling. Because again, cable cutting has been going on now for many years. A lot of folks who are not sports fans are especially not thrilled when they find out how much of their cable bill goes to pay for that family of networks. ESPN and the other, ABC obviously also carries college sports, but the cable channels under that banner. So we've seen even some cable providers start to offer non-ESPN packages just so that they can offer a lower price. Because again, people are going towards streaming. They're going towards, this kind of a la carte system, which arguably is just as expensive when you add everything together. But this kind of this is a real shift. This seems to be an almost irreversible shift. And it came up during some of the more in-depth reporting on the failed Pac-12 media deal that led to the conference to basically break apart. Yeah, it was by Apple. Yeah, the numbers were not quite as high as what linear cable like the ESPN networks, like the Fox Sports and such, CBS, et cetera, could offer. But a lot of those who were in the know said this unfortunately just came a little too early. The thought is, in the next time there's a series of renegotiations for these deals, these media deals, linear cable isn't going to be able to keep up because of this sort of hemorrhaging of users, and these disputes seem to be a fight over the shrinking pool of money that's going in. And ESPN knows it still is one of the drivers, or I should say Disney knows it's still one of the drivers of why people will subscribe to cable. But eventually there's a thought that will it eventually cave in, and specifically when the next opportunity comes to negotiate for these deals, will they ever be able to even match the prices they are at now? I know, looking at, so in the future, it may be the next round, it's going to be a deal that's more lucrative than what the Pac-12 is being offered by Apple, but it's going to end up being perhaps by one of these streaming services looking to pick up, because the cable companies can no longer compete with that, or I should say the linear networks can no longer compete with what the streaming channels can do. So you brought up a really good question, and I think what we're seeing with these battles is a part of this larger picture. We're seeing the cable pool shrink in terms of money, and Disney still has that leverage, but the entire pool that they're fighting for is getting smaller by the day.
Yeah, my only worry is sort of that sort of inflection point that may occur because we're all seeing the cable cutting that's going on, and for the most part, sports is what's keeping people on cable contracts. But then you see it in the streaming prices for like YouTube TV and what is the other one? Hulu Live Sports, and it's way more expensive than everyone's used to paying for cable. And also factoring in like basically like all these, I wouldn't call them third party streaming services, but all the ones that aren't, basically everybody but Hulu and Netflix are all losing around $1.5 to $2 billion a year with the streaming services like Disney Plus, Peacock, and Paramount Plus. So I'm wondering if college football may not have the leverage it has now moving. It may not have the leverage now. It may not have the leverage in the future that it has now, given that with these streaming services, everyone's losing money, and how that might actually work out for these schools.
I'll admit I'm genuinely concerned about it, only because to some extent, college football might be still considered a loss leader. Like, you're going to bring in an audience even though you're hemorrhaging money on it. It's like, I forgot what it was, but I know the Olympics for a long time was people were bidding on the Olympics knowing they were never going to make it up, but they knew they were pulling in so many viewers that they could load up those commercials for other network shows, and everyone and their mother was watching the Olympics. Historically, that was how they would approach bidding for the Olympics. But I'm not sure that granted, there's going to be some sophisticated people crunching numbers at some of these organizations and these companies, so they'll have a number, but I am concerned it's going to be short. Nate, I see you wanted to add something to this, so would love to hear from you.
Yeah, appreciate it. I'll make it quick. Whenever I can just jump in and offer a couple of snippets, I'll do so. But I think the Fubo TV thing is one of the best. It's geared towards sports. They have the regional channels that people want. Like, for instance, I live in Georgia, and Bally is a big topic, almost an eyesore, because people want to watch the Braves, people want to watch the Hawks, and wherever you guys live, I'm sure there's the same types of discussions that happen regionally. So, we've danced around several different DirecTV, YouTube TV. In fact, I love YouTube TV. I think it's probably one of the best platforms in terms of the interface, but they didn't have Bally. So we were paying for DirecTV, we were paying for YouTube TV, and we signed up for Fubo, and I have ESPN Plus, and I have SEC Plus. So I have all of those, and we were like, "What are we doing? This is getting this is getting ridiculous." And to Bob's point, it was supposed to be you sign up for this, you get this, and it's supposed to be cheaper. Well, you know what? To watch what you want to watch as a sports fan, it's gotten 3 times more expensive if you think about it. So the last point I'll make is I hope that they figure out a regional service, and I don't give a rip what it is. Disney owning ESPN has become a huge problem. I think they're hemorrhaging big time. I think Bob said that. And I think they're trying to figure out contract negotiations, which has been a problem with Spectrum and DirecTV and yada yada. But I'll say this lastly, Fubo has been the best provider for me regionally because they're so geared towards sports, and then I still pay for ESPN Plus, and I pay for SEC Plus, and now I guess there's NFL Plus too. So, dude, it is a conundrum of I won't say the word because you're recording, but of things that people don't want to pay for. So it's ludicrous.
Absolutely. Ski Masks Murphy, I know you wanted to follow up, and then we'll go to Scott Thompson.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more comment on that with Nate talking about all the places he goes to, get his sports. And before Charter, Spectrum, and Disney sort of worked out their deal, I did notice a decent amount of these college football social media accounts were getting caught, showing game highlights and it being from, I guess we call them pirate sites such as Stream East during this whole battle. And it seems like people are going to try to get this sports one way or another. And hopefully they can work out better deals so that pirating doesn't end up the main way that everybody watches it, even though it may end up being the only way eventually.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because eventually if they make it too difficult, people are going to just find another way, and there's always another way. And I think more people would rather do it above board, and obviously for a lot of purposes we encourage people to do it above board. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Hey, Scott, what's going on? You've been super patient. Then after that, I promise I'll get to you, Ronnie, and I'll get to you, C-Dubs.
Yeah, I just want to know your thoughts on the Pac-12 this year. I mean, it could be one of the deepest conference, and it's kind of a shame that it's the last year that it's here. But, I mean, you've got teams up and down that can play. You got USC and Caleb Williams. You got Washington that almost reminds you of an Ohio State team that's just got a quarterback and the weapons on the outside. And they actually have defense, too. And then you got Utah that has beat 2 Power 5 teams already. I mean, and they're down 8 to 10 starters to start the year with injuries. I mean, if they can get healthy, they could be dangerous too. You got Oregon. Oregon State's been blowing some teams out too. They look really good. And then you've got like Arizona on Saturday, who almost beat Mississippi State if they didn't have the 5 turnovers. Even Cal, who was picked 9th, played tough against Auburn. You got Colorado, who's picked 11th in the Pac-12, and they're showing out. They're the other team besides Utah that's beat 2 Power 5 teams this year. I'm just wondering your thoughts on the Pac-12 being this deep and one of the best conferences this year.
Oh, I completely agree. It's a pleasant surprise to see them doing so well, and which is also bittersweet. Their last hurrah, whether it continues throughout the whole season. I mean, I love we're still in that stage where it's like we think they seem good across the board, but we'll find out how they actually stack up, maybe against each other or against how the conference does. But yeah, this has been the year where the Pac-12 has been unusually good and the SEC has been unusually mundane when you look across all the teams. Not saying Georgia is part of that, but it seems to be a slightly down year. And that game with Mississippi State and Arizona was kind of an interesting moment because you have an Arizona team that has been awful year after year in recent years, really getting a close loss to that Mississippi State team. Arizona State as well, and I'm picking them out because they're the middle teams. Cal is the other one, as you said. Everyone thought Cal was going to be awful, and now it's hard to tell: is Auburn bad or did Cal just kind of rise up? Oklahoma State beat Arizona State, but now I'm still curious to see how they do against Fresno State this coming week, because Fresno State seems to be a G5 with a chance to rise up. Although again, seemingly they were able to win, but they had kind of an off day last week when they struggled in double overtime, beat Eastern Washington. And Eastern Washington the previous week got blown out here in Minneapolis by North Dakota State. They held the game at the Viking Stadium. So again, we're still in that stage where it's like, are people just working out the early bugs? Will they get stronger as the season goes out? But above, the only team that seems to be pretty mediocre right now is Stanford, because they absolutely stunk it up with USC on Saturday, because again, it was 49-3 at the end of the first half. And again, I still love the guy who wrote that the second half of that game should have been an email. But I think you're right. I mean, with Colorado, because Colorado's by far is the biggest surprise. Colorado, I mean, everyone's saying that. No one expected, not only prime time, but his son to be such an incredible quarterback. Travis Hunter was well known in the whole saga of how he got to join Jackson State and then obviously followed them there. But I mean, to see what they're doing now is tremendous. And by the end of September, I think we're going to have sort of a leader in the house in the very least, because we're going to see Colorado's going to go on the road and play Oregon, assuming again how they do against Colorado State this weekend. USC is going to play Oregon State, but then they're going to play Colorado. We're going to see we're going to get a better idea of who seems to be one of those leaders in the conference. But as you said, Utah has put up a decent resume. Washington, I'm glad to hear your thoughts on that, because Nate, I thought, had some valid questions about what's bringing Washington its value. And then to see the Tupac teams, Oregon State and Washington State, have, a solid start to their season as well. Washington State looks really good right now, actually. It's kind of, it's so strange to see this conference having such a great year and with so many quarterbacks. They're absolutely the conference of quarterbacks right now. The SEC would be murderous if they had just one or two of these QBs on their teams. And to be frank, a few of those QBs came from there. But
Oregon State is the other team I sorry not to interrupt. Just if there's an Oregon State fan in here, I'd love to hear like what they, with DJ being there, he had his trials and tribulations at Clemson, but dude, that team looks like they could really wreck it up. And then I think they play Utah week, I'll look it up, week 5. Yeah, week 5, Utah. Yeah. That's going to be a good one right there.
So maybe the question is, I mean, the Pac-12's got 8 ranked teams. Does the winner of the Pac-12 make it to the playoff? I mean, you got these teams like Georgia who, I mean, their non-conference is absolutely terrible. Same with Michigan. I mean, Florida State, they played LSU, but like all these conferences have one good team. But the Pac-12, they have about 8 teams that are ranked. I mean, does the winner of the Pac-12 make it to the playoff almost regardless, or just by making it through that gauntlet?
Well, I certainly think, the way it's stacked up at this point in the season, the Pac-12 winner has a strong chance. Of course, if there is enough cannibalism and we end up with like a 2-loss champion, that might make it a little murkier, depending on how the other conferences work out. But if we get at this point, a 1-loss Pac-12 champ could be there, depending on who the loss is and if the conference stays as strong as it's looking at this point. Almost certainly, this is probably the strongest they've looked in a long time. I mean, there have been seasons where it just seemed like we needed a perfect champion from the Pac-12 to even have a shot at making the 14 playoff. But this seems to be in its swan song season, at least in the current lineup, the best, one of the best opportunities for the conference to get someone in that playoff and potentially even a real contender in the playoff. That was kind of the joke last year. It looked like USC, before they lost to Utah in the Pac-12 title game, when Caleb Williams unfortunately got gimpy in the middle of that game and wasn't able to run around like he normally does. I was truly believing we were going to watch USC go and get their dream of being blown out in the first round of the playoff. And I say that with complete honesty. USC fans would have been thrilled to watch their team go to the playoff and get blown out in the first round, because it would have seemed like progress. But, maybe this will be the year. Except this time, it's not just the honor of being blown out by the eventual champion or runner-up. It's a Pac-12 team might actually get in there and have a real shot. Because, I mean, the only team to make the final was Oregon that first year. Because Washington
the follow-up to that, Bob, is everyone rips on the transfer portal, and there's reason to rip on it, right? But then there's the positive with all these transfers that we're seeing from Oklahoma to USC, for DJ going to Oregon State. Like, you have to kind of look at the positives there too. And again, I'm not trying to hijack all the talking space, but that is a legitimate point about the transfer portal. You get players that want to go where they want, coaches go where they want, then it makes it a little bit more competitive, and now we're seeing a better Pac-12. So I just had to point that out.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to, and I'm going to let Ski Mask Smurfy, he had his hand up, but I just want to say that's absolutely it. I read a point that I think I'm in deep agreement with now, that the transfer portal has allowed some of these really stacked rosters that were to some extent maybe not using all the talent available to distribute among other teams where they're being used really well. And I remember actually in the comments before he came up here, Ski Mask Smurfy and I were, I mean, because I had mentioned that historically we had scholarship limits because there were teams with unlimited scholarships just stacking up rosters to play keep away. And it was Bear Bryant at Alabama's favorite thing to do. And then we had scholarship limits, which allowed players to more opportunities, and teams had to be more judicious about who they were selecting. But Ski Mask Murphy, what's your thought?
The transfer portal,
Or no,
honestly,
whatever.
is.
You had your hand up. I know you wanted to
Oh
comment
yeah,
on
yeah.
something.
It was in terms when Nate started talking about the transfer portal. The transfer portal is honestly one of the best things to happen. I don't know if how many people actually understand how like extremely close it was to almost being slavery for the athletes before the transfer portal came into being. It used to be the only way you could transfer to a school and not sit out a year is if you already graduated from the school you was originally attending. Before that, to get to transfer out, one, you would have to sit out a year, and two, you would have to have the coach of the team you're trying to leave sign off on you being allowed to leave, which the most common thing that would happen is the team that would want the player would also be in that same conference, and you trying to go to a team in the same conference, that coach would just deny that when that's the team who's going to actually see you and have actually watched film of you. It's going to be a team who you've actually played before. So it made things very tough. And now these kids are just able to go wherever, which is perfect. Well, for one time, and I think also you get the 30-day exception for if your head coach gets fired during a certain time period, which I'm sure will probably happen with Michigan State. But the transfer portal, great for the kids, and Dion and then the head coach at Texas State have sort of like revealed that the transfer portal may be the way to rebuild your team and get back better very quickly because Texas State, I think they were around like 65 new kids on the team, and I think Dion was like 86, which most schools aren't going to be that drastic with an overhaul, but you can see you can just swipe away at all these players who aren't getting a chance to play at where they're at and build something that's competitive for you.
Absolutely. And yeah, I was just thinking of some of these transfers like JT Daniels, who seems to be doing well at Rice. I mean, yeah, it was Texas they were playing against, but they got that upset against Houston in the rivalry game. But it's fun to imagine all the places he's been. I mean, he got what 3 chances to play Texas with 3 different teams, and now here he is. He's doing well at a new school. Although again, I understand why some people would want to corral that a bit.
You,
I want to give
you can
C
throw
Dubs
Tate
an
Martell.
opportunity. Oh, go ahead.
I was saying you could throw Tate Martell in there as well. I think Tate Martell
Well,
is reasonable.
Tate didn't really get much of anything out of any place he went, but he was certainly a journeyman in his process. But hey, C Dubs, what's going on? You've been really patient.
Yeah, can you guys hear me all right?
Sure can.
Awesome. Yeah, well, as much as I love the Pac-12, being a Utah fan, I want to swing it over to the opposite coast and talk about this Tennessee-Florida matchup this weekend, and maybe more specifically about Billy Napier and his team. Being a Utah fan, watching the Gators come into town. Honestly, this might be an unpopular opinion. I thought Graham Mertz played pretty well. Coming out of Wisconsin, obviously he had that Heisman game to open the season. I think it was the COVID season he had, and then things kind of went down the hill from there. But watching him come play Utah, I think he had somewhere upwards of 300 yards, and he honestly did not play that bad. Honestly, was expecting a lot worse from him, and watching that game, I think the final score was 24-11. The Gators shot themselves in the foot so many times with I think it was like the special teams play where they were receiving a punt. They had 2 number 3s on the field or something like that. They just really shot themselves in the foot. And so with this Tennessee team, I think they were coming off some FCS team. I think it was like a PA team or
it was Austin P.
Austin P, yeah. With them, I mean, they still beat them pretty soundly, but I mean, not as soundly as a an SEC powerhouse would be comfortable with, I guess one would say. So just want to get your thoughts on this matchup this weekend, it being kind of an old school rivalry. And yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on Napier's program and kind of the culture he's built there, and then your kind of thoughts on the upcoming game?
Well, my thoughts on the upcoming game is still leaning heavily towards Tennessee. I know the players had a players-only meeting kind of a moment after that game against Austin Peay because it did not go quite how they had imagined. They had to struggle a bit to get that pesky team off their back. So to some extent, I think Tennessee, if that meeting is one of those where they really galvanize the troops, they're going to come out swinging and wanting to prove that, hey, last year wasn't just a blip. Tennessee is back, and hey, all orange teams are back, but they're gonna show that they're gonna be a contender and be a serious contender in the SEC to potentially unseat the reigning champ Georgia, especially right after Alabama looked weak against another orange team, Texas. To some extent, I wonder how much of that annoyance is also going to be seeing themselves ranked 11 under Alabama, just under Alabama in the AP rankings. That's got to rankle just a little bit. But with Florida and what's going on with Billy Napier, it's interesting to watch this whole process. I know Florida fans are really impatient with how obviously he wasn't as successful as they were hoping immediately out of the box. How he develops over this season. And again, we're in this kind of weird, even though we've had a couple of games for teams, it's still not clear who's truly good and who's truly bad. Losing against Utah looks solid. I mean, obviously Utah went and took care of their following game, and Florida did what they were expected to do against an FCS program like McNeese. This is going to be, I think, the real defining moment for this Florida team. If they look bad against Tennessee, I think it's going to start to get really warm there. I mean, it's already hot. It's Florida. But, I mean, it's going to get warm for them, especially as they get into the rest of their SEC schedule. Of course, there's opportunities to build off of that. They're going to follow Tennessee, which, again, I presume Tennessee is going to win that one with a game against Charlotte, although Charlotte has been an entertaining program. First of all, I loved somebody commented that, Bill Poggi being on the sideline in a tank top and carpenter shorts as he's coaching the team. It's like everyone were falling in love with him because for a while they were putting some serious fear in Maryland before Maryland pulled away late. But again, if they were to lose that team, that would be, I don't know if he'd survive the rest of that week. And then they got the Kansas and probably the Kentucky and Vanderbilt game to kind of, so, I mean, they've got not as strong of a schedule before. Of course, they have the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, in which case Georgia is probably going to roll over them. But yeah, Florida, I admit, the jury's still out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I guess a follow-up question: if they end up having a similar season to last season, they go on 6-6 or 6-7 with the blowout loss to Oregon State in the bowl game last year, which has a whole nother story. I mean, who is the leading candidate for the Gators? I know there's been some buzz about possibly poaching Coach Prime up. I mean, obviously, depending on how this season goes for the Buffs. But I don't know. I don't know if there's. I mean, there's always a candidate, but I don't know. What are your thoughts there for a possible replacement there?
Ooh, I see Nate's got his hand up. I'll let you go first.
Man, you're just talking right in my wheelhouse, so I don't want to jump in. It's your space, but I'll offer some insight on these combos. I think Tennessee's going to beat Florida. I don't see Florida winning this game. Tennessee's picked to win by 7. Based on what we've seen with Billy Napier and Florida so far, it's not impressive. Tennessee is easily the better team based off what we saw last year and what we're seeing this year. I just, even though it's in Gainesville, I don't see Florida winning the game. Now, here it is. College football on Saturdays, any given Saturday, right? It can happen. I'm not saying it can't. I just think Tennessee, I'd say it's at least 65-35 in favor of Tennessee. I can't see Florida winning the game, even though it's at home. There's too many athletes on Tennessee still, and Florida's trying to play catch up. So that's my opinion there. When it comes to Coach Prime, he's going to be a hot topic as we go forth and we watch this Colorado thing. Like I said, it's gonna be interesting how much it calms down when they play Oregon. We'll get a real dose of where Colorado is as a program under Coach Prime. I know they have athletes on offense. I don't know what they have on defense really. The Oregon game will really kind of set the standard. If Colorado could beat Oregon, then you're really going to see like the biggest buff chest you've ever seen out of Colorado ever. So last point, Prime is not going to Florida. There's no way. He's a Florida State guy, true and true. He went to Florida State. That's his. If there's ever a place that he would want to go in college football, it would be Florida State. There's no way he goes to Florida. And I'm not saying that to shame any of the questions, whatever. But there's people. I would say Tim Tebow gets involved with Florida on some capacity before I would see Prime go to Florida. And I'm not saying Tebow is a head coach by any means, but they bring him in there as like a recruiter or like a quarterbacks coach or something like that, and then bring in somebody to tandem the Tebow thing as like a strategy play. I would see that before I would see Coach Prime going to the Florida Gators. I honestly, there's no amount of money that I see Prime taking to go to Gainesville. So 2 cents.
Yeah, one thing Prime does have is already a lot of money. So, I mean, and that to some extent allows him to be judicious in where he picks and potentially just say, you know what, I'm going to stay at Colorado for another year if it were to become that kind of a challenge. He's already, at some point I could see him he can afford to do what he wants to do. And he's clearly shown his willingness to stay, even at Jackson State for what people thought, because I think he could have left even a year earlier. And he was like, no, I'm going to stay one more year. So he'll do what he'll do, and I think you're right. To an extent, Florida would, for that very reason, may not be the one he would go to. But, of course, who knows? They could be surprising us. Human condition is one of those things where we never know how people are going to act until they're actually put in that position. Let's see here. I want to try and get through the last couple of folks who've hit request. I see I've got Ron. Let's see. Ronnie J. Yeah, boy, Ron. What's going on, man?
What's up, guys? I got to say, this has been an incredibly odd weekend, It was an incredible weekend, actually. I went to some weddings. Rutgers one. I'm in New York City visiting my friends and family up here, so it's fantastic. But Aaron Rodgers' fucking leg blew up yesterday. So that was really awful. But back to college football, because that's what we're doing here right now. There is absolutely no universe Deion Sanders goes to Florida. No matter how much money they can give him, another school will give him just as much money, so he has no incentive to ever go there. If he does, though, that would be awesome. Oh, my God. The sickos content we would get out of that would be so cool. So that would be awesome. And I wanted to mention something about like what Ski Mask said about the transfer portal. It is good to an extent where I feel like we sort of gone too far with it, with Colorado, for example, where what he did to those kids was so unfair. Just telling them, all right, get out of here. I don't want you anymore. We're not dealing with adults at the end of the day. We're not dealing with employees getting fired. At the end of the day, these guys are still kids and they are still students. So to just pull the rug out from under them like that is absolutely insane. And then one last thing I wanted to mention, because someone mentioned USC and the Pac-12. USC is not making it out of the Pac-12. As good as they are, that schedule gets really insane at the end. They have Colorado September 30th, which I don't really know where Colorado actually is, but that's going to be a tough game just because you're playing at Colorado. Obviously, the crowd's going to go crazy knowing that if they beat you, they can keep you out of the playoffs. They have to play Washington, Utah, Oregon. I think two more of those are away games. So I just don't see a way USC, even if they're as good as they are, can just win everything. And if they do, I think they honestly probably deserve to be the number one team in the country.
Yeah,
I just want to know
the Pac-12 could very well return to being the conference of cannibals if all these good teams keep talking about it. And that could very well happen again. I see your hand up, Ski Masks Murphy. Did you want to add something real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to go off with Ron. He just said, yeah, what Deion did when he walked in there and what he said to those kids was, I don't agree with that part of the whole new transfer portal process. That was, I don't know, that's like someone just storming your castle and you didn't know they were arriving. What he did there was awful. But also, another thing on Deion, a lot of people are saying, the whole Florida thing, but from what I've been reading with a lot of analysts looking at things so far, everyone at the NFL level is saying more than likely Dion will end up getting a coaching job in the NFL because apparently I had to look into it. Apparently, Shador Sanders has never been coached by anybody but his father. So they're thinking that if Shador leaves this year, next year, at some point soon afterwards, someone will bring Dion up to help coach his son.
And, just because he has the ability to do whatever he wants because he's financially stable, maybe that's exactly what he'll do. Well, that'll be a mystery to see. I kind of curious there. Reese, I know you've been really patient. What's up, man? It's been a while.
It has been a while. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
I got 3 things to say. 2 are funny, 1's serious. Pick your poison. Someone mentioned Florida versus Charlotte in a few weeks. And I would like to say Charlotte needs this game. It's not about football. It's about Dale Earnhardt. 22 years ago, the state of Florida took Dale Earnhardt away from Charlotte. A second thing is ODU looks really good. As a resident ODU person, offense looks really good. Grant Wilson looks really good. Probably going to beat Wake this weekend and get the rest of the season undefeated. Third, someone just mentioned Dion in the NFL, and I would like to put in your head right now. Deion Sanders, coach of the Washington Commanders.
Well, we'll see there, and I think there was a good thought that he would follow his son. Now, ODU, Old Dominion. We'll see if they can make it through. That Sun Belt looks challenging, and Wake Forest.
I don't really think they're going to go undefeated, but I would not put Wake Forest this weekend past them.
But gosh, Sun Belt is absolute entertainment. I'm so glad they're in it. I see a couple of hands up. I'll get to them, and then I'll try and get to our next caller. Let's see, John and then Ron. What's going on?
Hey, I just want to say it's another ODU guy. Let's go Monarchs! I can't wait to see us whoop Wake Forest this Saturday. I hope.
And Ricky, we trust.
And Ricky, we trust. Oh God,
love it. Yeah, boy, Ron, what's on your mind?
So, wait, are you guys being serious about ODU? Are they actually good? Because
yes, ODU is actually good.
They looked bad against Virginia Tech, and then Virginia Tech looked bad against Purdue.
Can I take this one?
Yeah, you go for it, man.
Cool. So they looked bad against Virginia Tech. That was true. They didn't look as bad as they have in the past. Look up the first time they played.
Oh yeah, I went to Virginia Tech during that game. I remember that the first time.
I was on the sideline as a beat
Reese was on the
sideline.
He was our photog for that game. That's why it's been a while, but Reese was our photographer on the sideline.
Maybe you got a picture of me crying at it.
For the first upset. Don't forget, come to Norfolk, get robbed, and get upset. Wake Forest might find out this weekend. You don't know. Anyways, so ODU is utilizing the spread really well, and it's also helping their run game because they're spreading the field out. And this year, we actually have a quarterback who has legs and can use them, as opposed to the very statuesque Hayden Wolf that we had last year. So Grant Wilson is able to run, can run, and runs well. So the spread run for us works because we have a quarterback who actually isn't scared to get hit and isn't scared to run. Jordan Bly, Isaiah Page, and the rest of the receivers, Javon Harvey, are really good. Amari Morrison does not get the credit he deserves on the defensive line. Lamarion James is a cornerback. Also a really good return man. I'm just saying, no ACC team has played at Old Dominion and won.
That's actually striking. I never even thought about that.
What other ones have played there besides Virginia Tech? I have no idea.
Virginia Tech twice.
Okay, yeah, well, that's fucking wild, man.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about.
I can't get over that first loss.
They are good.
I'd rather not talk about our away ACC teams.
Hey, listen, I was there for the first one, and it was cathartic. Growing up in the state of Virginia, I grew up a Tech fan because, either you're a Tech fan or a UVA fan growing up. I didn't think it would go down that way until it happened. However, I don't know if I ever told you the story, but the first play of the game, I got run over on the kickoff because their tight end Mitchell ran off the sidelines and ran me over. My head was not on a swivel. I think I was the first to break the fact that the Tech quarterback broke his leg during the game. But they actually do have a good offense. because they have a running quarterback. They actually do have a halfway decent defense. Jason Henderson is a future NFL draft pick, probably top 3 round. They actually could do this weekend, and it wouldn't shock me if they got to a bowl game this year. Despite
Awesome.
what my degree says, I am not a homer.
Well, I appreciate it, Reese. Thank you so much. Let's see. I want to try and get through.
Of
Let's see.
course.
We got one last caller right now. DJ Beats, you've been super patient. What's on your mind?
Man, thank you, bro. I just kind of want to speak. I'm not necessarily an X's and O's guy, but I want to speak I'm in the hip hop world, and I'm hearing a lot of rumors. People are cool with certain NFL guys that have people that are in the industry and stuff. And what I'm hearing, man, is a lot of these dudes, and my homie Nate in here, I see him. We were talking previously, but I've confirmed it. They feel like, man, they could target some of these ADs that feel like, oh, my program's in the shitter. All they got to take is some ex-NFL guy to woo the talent and put some coaches around them. It's like getting to that point. And, I just, want to ask the room a question, but what happens if Colorado loses? It's like they're on this high, and
Yeah.
it's like, because it's really no other stuff. I mean, you got the Mel Tucker thing, some other stuff, but the media's milking this, and Dion is milking. I mean, I never heard of the Big Noon and ESPN at the same damn camp. It's just like, it's this crazy. So what happens when the Cinderella ride is over? I want to see your thoughts on that, man.
It depends on when it happens.
Yeah, I agree with what Reese just said. It depends on when it happens.
Because it seems like college football want them in the playoff. It's like they want this.
Well, they're a great story. I'll be honest. If it happened this week, it would not go over well. Only because Colorado State at this point is not on the same level as Colorado. So if it were this game, then yeah, no, people would be like, okay, no, maybe those other two teams, maybe TCU really is that bad this season. And, maybe Nebraska is just as awful as it seemed through the first 2 games. But if it's the game after that at Oregon, I don't think they'll be held to that hard of an account. I think no one would fault Dion if he said, like, look, it wasn't going to be a perfect season the first, like, however you'd say it. I'm not even going to pretend to say I could speak like primetime. But I think people would be willing to say, like, all right, yeah, no. I mean, Autzon's a tough place to play. Oregon's looking good. No fear there. Or even losing the USC at home. Either of those would not be as bad. Although there'll still be people, if Oregon or USC beat them, or let's say they run the table and then lose at Utah at the end, people would still go, see, I told you. They weren't as good. It's just because he's such a polarizing figure that folks are just looking forward to that opportunity, I think, to say that it's all fool's gold. But at the same time, and I do appreciate Ski Masks Murphy, I think it brought this up. Other than Colorado, the other team that did almost an entire changeover, not at the same level, was Texas State. And Texas State went out and impressed people that first game and then nearly pulled it off again against UTSA. And that was a heck of a game. It wasn't, it was tough for both teams involved. Those 2 teams have shown there is a model out there to do what people would not like to see done. But if it's effective, that's going to be tough. There's going to be head coaches looking real hard at their roster and thinking about, well, if Dion and J.K. Kinney can do it, why can't I?
Can I interject in this real quick?
Yeah, sure. Then I'd love to get the other 2.
I just, first of all, it ain't gonna happen this weekend. If Colorado State beats Colorado, hell has frozen over. But second point, can you all imagine the meltdown at ESPN if in the same week Aaron Rodgers tears his Achilles on live TV in the 4th play and Prime loses to Colorado State on prime time with game day?
Burn the barn down.
We might see ESPN fire. I can't imagine Stephen A. Smith on Monday morning. He might not show up.
Must watch TV.
I had one more question. I'm sorry. I want to interject. Do you think, just really quick, going into next year, based on all the shit show that's going on right now, that Congress will come in and try to regulate this NIL shit? Because I know everybody's leaving. I believe Carmani McClain is going to leave. That's a shit show in itself. I just want to see your thoughts on that. That's it. Thank you.
I'll touch on that really quick, and then I'll let John and Ski Masks Murphy get to their points. But I was once a guest on a regular weekly show on NIL. And so my thoughts on this, I don't think Congress is going to be able to get it going just because even though we've got all these multiple plans, there's a lot of reasons why I don't think Congress is going to eventually act on it. So I think what we're going to see with NIL, even though, because the NCAA really wants them to, because at this point we get all the states kind of coming up with their own versions of the law. They're easy baskets for a state legislature. They're very bipartisan. You have states all over the place from Alabama to New York State coming up with rules that are quite loose for the players. I mean, Missouri, pardon me, even though it only really benefits Mizzou, took the lead on that. And eventually, at the rate they're going, the bigger concern is by loosening the rules for NIL, allowing compensation to expand. You're actually endangering the biggest threshold that colleges are trying to keep, which is that the players are not employees. And it's a matter of time. And I think all indications is it's a matter of time. And California's got another law coming through the pipes. And remember, California's law is what kicked off NIL, where the ideas of sharing compensation or sharing some of the profits that get to these schools. At some point, there's going to be a challenge where a judge is going to be convinced that, you know what, you're saying they're not employees, but at this point, it's just meaningless words. By effect, all of these student athletes are employees. So that, to me, that's the bigger concern of where we're going with all of this. And the thing that may potentially avoid it is something that's always been talked about in the background, and the creation of the mega conferences has sort of pushed it into the foreground, is do the very top FBS programs depart from the NCAA? Boy, it sounds like they're transcending into something. But no, but do they depart and create what was originally called Division IV, which I hated that term because it was in the wrong direction as far as the numbering system goes. But do they go and create a new system where you can compensate the players and therefore avoid dragging all of the Olympic sports, or even worse, for college athletics as a whole, forcing every teams that can't even possibly afford to pay players into the players or employees world? Because we always forget the NCAA has divisions that do have some scholarships, but not really. I mean, Division II can possibly afford, you destroy athletic programs if you did that. So those are the macro levels. We're talking NIL, and it kind of burgeons into some other things. But I want to allow, let's see here, Ski Masks Murphy, and then John, and then I'll get to you, Nate.
Okay, because we covered a lot of.
Yeah, we kind of covered a few topics on that.
Yeah, but so DJ's original point about Deion and the hype train. Honestly, right now the Pac-12 is a gauntlet for Deion to try to go through. He's got Oregon, USC, UCLA, Oregon State, Washington State, Utah. That's what, 7? Because it's 8 of them are ranked, so he has to go through the other 7 currently ranked schools. It's going to be a tough gauntlet. If he can run the table, the hype's going to get extremely crazy. But if he loses to Colorado State this week, it will be insane. Because, as you said, I think there's only been this is like the 3rd time Big Noon Saturday at College Game Day for a early season game has been at the same school. All hell will break loose. Colorado State fans are going to storm probably the whole state of Colorado.
And they know that. They know that shit.
Yeah, but more than I'd put it on Colorado has on a betting odds probably would have a plus 1,500 chance of winning this game. But back to what our host was talking about as far as NIL and sort of making players employees is, this all sort of goes back, even he brought up California, but it's all sort of really starts with Northwestern and how their football team actually tried to unionize, in which initially they won. Then the NCAA pulled different kinds of stunts and got those lawyers to get it out of there. But yeah, this whole NIL, it has gotten out of hand. I mean, California started at first, and they were going to be the first to sort of do the Division IV thing, because California originally said we're going to allow. They sort of said we're writing legislation for our kids to get NIL. Then NCAA said if you allow your kids to get paid, we're going to kick out of NCAA. And in California, all the schools just said, that's perfectly fine. We have enough schools here that we could have a successful college system that works for us. And now we've gotten to this point where sort of, everything's out of hand. I've been privy to conversations of knowing guys who are going to transfer probably like a week before it even happens because people were throwing NIL money at them. Even well, I'm not going to put names out there because then someone might take this and run it somewhere. But there's certain high-profile guys who transfer schools because their NIL packs. We have those, but then you have personal people who are like, "Hey, I will just front you $5 million to come to the school to get a percentage of the NIL deals you eventually get on the back end." And so, yeah, you're right. It has gone out of hand, but no one's probably going to fix it. Like the same reason that I don't know if anybody watched the Bishop Sycamore documentary. Why they couldn't stop Bishop Sycamore? There's so much money involved that people are just able to get away with. No one's going to step in.
Love it. Well, thank you on that. And I have to just say, maybe another night because I'm running out of juice myself. But Bishop Sycamore reminded me, on RCFB years ago found a fake college football team hovering on the edge of the game. College of Fate.
Was that one in Arkansas?
Yep. That was my
Okay.
favorite thing I ever dug up when I was at RCFB, and I had a couple of pieces on that were always interesting. Yeah, and it started in Arkansas, and then it was in North Carolina, but they had basically the same name. Let's see here, John, what's going on?
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond back. I think NIL. I mean, I think at this point, for anything to really even, I think we're at a point of no return. I think it would take literally a federal judge rule to even go back at any point from this point forward. Because I think any senator or representative that would try to knock NIL down would never be voted to anything in a political office again, especially in a deep South state. There's no chance they wouldn't even win an election for the PTA board. NIL, forget a general office. They would never sniff anything. They probably wouldn't be able to be allowed to run a Girl Scout troop, nonetheless run anything that's political. But going back to your question, DJ, I really think the hype's got to die at some point. This team doesn't go undefeated. The Colorado State is, because I think actually CFB posted this today. I believe Colorado State's their only non-Power 5 matchup the entire year. Other than that, they are playing all Power 5 schools the rest of the year. And like Ski Mask said, it is the absolute gauntlet of a schedule. I mean, a schedule that I think most teams in general don't get out of unscathed. I think what the most realistic situation, and I think still most likely builds up the hype train, is probably Dion wins probably maybe 8-9 games and probably gets a nice prime time bowl game spot. Maybe New Year's 6, maybe not. But of course, once they lose, the criticisms will come in. But the fact that he's taking a program that was 1-11 last year and flipping around to this scale already with this hype and this this talent with players that were playing a step down to playing up to this level this quickly it is amazing. But yeah, I think the hype train will die eventually. But I think this year he's done everything he's already wanted to do already, which is pretty incredible.
All right, last thoughts, Nate. What's going on?
Yeah, appreciate it, Bob. So NIL, I just had to jump in here, and DJ, appreciate you bringing it up. I could go on and on and on about this. We could probably do a 2-hour space, honestly. NCAA, I'll just say it right here. NCAA sucks. We know this. This is the whole issue with why we're dealing with this conversation, and the federal government actually ruled against them, which is why the NIL got created, right? So once they got put down and said, you know what, you're wrong, we're going to give the players an opportunity to make money in college. That's what created this whole thing. So off the rip, NCAA's opinion is not valid. So what needs to take place is all the deans of the Power Conference, Power Fives, they need to come to a meeting without the NCAA, and they need to make rules and regulations that govern a new set of standards for athleticism with all the sports. Because, when you look at volleyball, when you look at lacrosse, you look at golf, whatever it is, everybody wants all those sports to be scholarship sports at Power 5 conference and D1 schools, D2 schools, whatever it is, D3. You want them to have an opportunity to play sports. Sports makes the world go round. I mean, billions and billions and billions of dollars garner around sports, hotels, food, everything you want to go through. Right. So we have to keep that, and we have to keep it close. It's the most important thing that runs the economy. So, like I said, I could make this a 3-hour space if you guys want to go into the details, but the point is NCAA has no governing body over Division I sports. They're just an entity that likes to pretend they do, and they investigate teams. They get bought and paid for when they want to be. We could go as far back in time when, they tried to investigate Syracuse or, oh God, Alabama, Georgia, whoever you want to go through. Everybody's been investigated, right? But at the end of the day, they pick and choose litigations and lawsuits they want to go through. But at the same thing is going on with NIL. So, man, I can make this the longest the longest stand on a soapbox and talk all day long, but the problem is the NCAA is the problem. We need the deans of the universities, top 10 head coaches to come to an agreement on how you pay players appropriately, whether it be a nest egg or a 3 to 5 year deal. Do you graduate college and get paid appropriately? If you don't graduate or you don't attend the college 2 years, there's all these different ways of governing it. I'm not saying I know it, but that's why you have a discussion. The NCAA never has the discussion. They just like to take a player like Walker out of North Carolina and deny him a transfer, which we all know he should be playing, and then they'll let another player transfer like Shador go to Colorado. It makes no sense. You have to make it equal for everyone. And the minute you don't, you're going to have all these people hating the NCAA, but they don't know all the ins and outs of why they allow players to transfer and then say, oh, I don't know about NIL. I don't know about it. I'm going to pretend like I don't. It's the same thing they were doing 10 years ago when players were getting paid and all these stories that have come out. I mean, all you got to do is go online and read all the stories of players are finally saying, yeah, I got paid $50K to go on a recruiting trip. I mean, come on. We all know that shit's real. It's true. It's probably the worst thing in college sports in terms of payment and how we all try to pretend and act like it's not a real thing. Dude, college sports is a multi-billion-dollar business. You don't think people are going to try to do what they got to do to, make money and not say what they got to say? It's ridiculous. Thank you for letting me talk, Bob. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And guys, I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to thank you all for joining us. This was a great talk. Went on for a bit longer than typical. Usually we go for about an hour. This went for about an hour and 35. So I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. This was our CFB Talk 157. I wanted to thank all of you who came up here and joined the conversation. We do these every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank all of you. My name is Bobak Hayeri. This was RCFB Talk 157. Now I'm hang up and listen.